Welcome back. So today we're going to be discussing specialist squads. Basically, we're going to be discussing which squads are worth running and in what context they're worth running, and a little bit about their customization, but this is mostly going to be focused on which ones I think you should run as a free-to-play player, and which ones are worth throwing on if you've got a few more slots. This is specifically pertaining to infantry squads. So, to lay out the ground rules, number one, we're not talking about assault squads because everybody knows assault squads are the best. We're also not talking about rifleman squads because there's nothing special about rifleman squads. We won't be discussing paratrooper squads because they, like assaulters, are pretty much auto takes. So this is going to be discussing all of the other specialist squads. So your mortar squad, your engineer squad, your sniper squad, your anti-tank squad, and your radio operator squad. And probably the machine gun squad. We'll touch on them just a little bit, but they're right on the edge of being the kind of auto take squad like a machine gunner. Or not a machine gunner, like an assaulter. So starting from the top of my list here, let's look at the flamethrower soldiers. So in a flamethrower squad, you're going to get up to 2 flamethrowers, and then depending on which squads you have, some of the old Stalingrad squads will have different options than some of the mainline squads, but in general, you'll have up to 2 engineers, you'll have an option for an assaulter, you'll have an option for a medic, you'll have an option for an AT soldier, and for a radio operator. I think in the non-Stalingrad squads, it's 2 assaulters instead of a medic. In addition to that, you get the option to build the Implement, which is basically a Molotov cannon. It's kind of like a mounted machine gun, except it launches Molotovs. So, if it's me, my squad layout is going to include at least 1 engineer, at least 1 assaulter. My current squad for Russia has a medic and an assaulter, but that being said, it would make a lot of sense to run an AT soldier. This is going to be a very aggressive squad that's going to play up in the enemy's face, so there's a very good chance you're going to run into enemy tanks doing that, and having access to that AT soldier can be extremely useful. Now, flamethrower squads first become available at BR3, so the normal caveat that I would have about AT weapons doesn't exist here. From BR3 onward, you get projectile launchers, whether you're playing America, Russia, Germany, Japan, they all have them. So it's very worthwhile to run that AT soldier. I just don't personally have one on this particular squad. I'm pretty sure that I have one on my German squad, the non-premium one, the tech tree one. I'm pretty sure I have the AT soldier. The premium one just has extra flamethrowers, so there's that. In addition to that, you're going to have your 2 riflemen that fill out your last 2 slots. They're riflemen. There's really nothing to say about them, they just are filler. I would still max out the squad though, just for staying power, and if you get the whole squad on an objective, they'll capture it faster and they'll do a better job holding it. But that, more or less, is your flamethrower squad. Moving on to engineers. Your engineer squad is going to be a 6-man squad. They initially, like all squads, come mostly with riflemen, but you can upgrade them to have all 6 members be engineers, or you can add in some specialists. So, for example, my squad has a choice between a radio operator and an assaulter, and a medic and an AT soldier. I have the AT soldier and I've got the radio operator. The main reason for that is because I wanted to get the benefits of having a radio operator without bringing a radio squad. But if you were going to regularly bring a radio squad, I would bring the assaulter over the radio operator. I just did this because the way that I was running my lineup at the time, I didn't have room for a radio squad, and I still wanted to be able to call an artillery. In addition, an engineer squad's going to get you access to all of the cool things that you can build, so light machine gun nests. If they're rank 2, they'll get access to the ampulette, get access to stationary AT guns, and they get access to AA guns, in addition to all the normal things that engineers can build. So the way that I'm currently running them, it's all engineers except for the last two guys, which are the AT soldier and the radio operator. Like I said, you could swap the radio operator for an assaulter. You could go 2 assaulters, but again, I feel like the AT soldier with the prevalence of armor in the game is just more worthwhile. I suppose if you're playing the Americans, you might make the argument to not take the AT soldier, but that's just because American shoulder-launched AT weapons are subpar. But outside of them, I think for every other nation, the AT soldier is definitely the clear choice there. They're going to be more of a mid-range squad anyway, so taking the extra assaulters, it's nice, but it's not really necessary. But having 2 assaulters in a pinch would turn you into half of an assault squad, so it might be worthwhile. It's up to you. In general, your engineers are going to be the backbone of your army. They basically build all of the fortifications and they support your team. They directly counter many of the enemy's playstyles, whether it's bringing in planes, tanks, using spawn points, the whole 9 yards. So they're very good. Moving on from them, we have our sniper squads. The sniper squads can take up to 3 snipers. They can become, I believe, 5-man squads. And they can take up to 2 specialists. And those specialists can be, in my case, medics, radio operators, engineers, AT soldiers, and machine gunners. Split with the first 3 and then the last 2 being your 2 choices. So, I personally would go with an engineer and an AT soldier. But if you were running Germany, it would actually make a lot of sense to go with the medic and the machine gunner and play them in more of an assault role, where you give them all their STGs, and then you give the medic his STG, you give the machine gunner whatever your preference of machine gun is, and you run them like an assault squad. The thing is, I would only do that if you already had all of your assault squads in use and you for some reason needed another one. An assault squad at the end of the day is going to do what this squad will do better, but it is an option. Alternatively, I think if you're running Russia, or if you're running Japan, you probably run the engineer and the AT soldier. If you're running America, I think I would drop the AT soldier for the machine gunner, and I would still run the engineer. In almost every case, I think having an engineer is going to be better. The only exception with the Germans is because it's already basically an assault squad, so adding the medic gives you your 4th assaulter, effectively. But it's up to you. They don't really get anything fancy that they can build. They do get scopes on their rifles. In most cases, they're getting rifles that are identical to their tech tree counterparts, but with a scope. At low BR, they're bolt actions. At mid BR, they're semi-automatics. And at high BR, for most nations, but not all, they're full auto rifles. So for the Russians, for example, they get the AVS-36. For the Germans, they get the STG and they get the MKB. The Americans get the Sniper Garens, which are semi-automatic, and the Japanese, I believe, don't get anything fancy at all like that. I think they only get bolt actions for now, but that may change in the future. Yeah, the Japanese don't have a high-tier sniper rifle to cap out at BR2 for their snipers, which is fine. In most cases, for most nations, if you want to play a sniper squad as a traditional sniper squad, even at high BR, I think you're better off bringing a bolt-action rifle. And that's because if you're playing at long range, the bolt-action rifle is going to give you more power to put down your target with one shot, and you're going to be less likely to require multiple shots to take them down. That being said, if you want to play them as a more forward operating squad, with the Germans you have like a knockoff assault squad that you can make out of them. With the Russians, you can treat them more like designated marksmen and treat them as more of a mid-range option and play them around the same range you'd play an engineer squad or a rifleman squad, and you can even push objectives with them. With the AVS-36, it gives you a lot of flexibility in that it's a very powerful semi-auto rifle, but if you flip it into full auto and you use the single-click ADS, so you still use the normal sights, you can pretty much treat it like any other AVS-36, and you have an automatic rifle to storm objectives with, and it performs fine at that. It does really well in like the 100-yard mid-range area, where you're not really taking particularly long-range shots and you're still applying pressure to objectives. Moving on from them, we have our AT squads. So, with an AT squad, you get the option for 2 more AT soldiers for 3 total. You get the option between a radioman, an engineer, and an assaulter, and you get that choice 2 times. And you get a choice between a sniper and a machine gunner. Now, the way that I'm running them is with 1 assaulter, 1 engineer, and then that last slot, I think, depends on what nation you're playing. If you're playing Germany, and you're playing at high tier, I think you take the sniper, you take an STG, and you can leave the scope on if you want. I take them off, and I just treat it like an extra assaulter in the squad. For Germany specifically, you could make the argument to run 2 assaulters and the sniper, and you would have what's like 90% of an assault squad, but you'd have lots of AT potential with it. The issue that I see there is that as a squad, there's an upgrade to build AT guns, and if you don't have an engineer, then you won't be able to build the AT gun. So I think it's always worth having the engineer, even in that one particular case with Germany. Now, with America, I think that you don't take the sniper unless you specifically want a designated marksman. I think machine gunners are going to bring you more value most of the time. When it comes to Russia, because you have an automatic rifle in your sniper slot, you have the option there to take either. I still think that the machine gunner is going to perform better most of the time, but the AVS-36 sniper is good enough, and it's flexible enough, that you can bring it, and it'll do perfectly fine. As far as Japan goes, I would take the machine gun, though. The AT squads are going to be extremely useful, especially given that tanks are extremely prevalent right now. If you're at BR 3, 4, or 5, your AT squads are going to do excellently, as long as you're playing, I guess, Russia or Germany or Japan. If you play at low BR as Japan, they're going to do very well. America, they're going to be very good at BR2, but I think they fall off really hard past BR2. And that's because at BR2, you have access to the Piet and you have access to the M1 bazooka, which the M1's pretty bad, but the Piat is usable once you figure out how to aim it. It has 80 mils of penetration after all. So almost every tank that you come across at BR2 you can eat. The problem that you run into as America is when you go beyond BR2, the M9 bazooka with 102 mils of pen simply does not have enough penetration to deal with most of the threats that you're going to run into in a reliable manner. So the value on an AT squad is going to be different if you're playing America than if you're playing any of the other nations, because Japan has very similar penetration on their AT weapons, but because they're fighting American tanks that are largely thin-skinned, it's not really a drawback, because that 100 mils of pen can kill every American tank. But if you're fighting the Germans, then it becomes an issue. Likewise, with Germany and with Russia, from BR3 and up, you have access to the Panzerfaust variants, and the Panzerfausts are phenomenal. Even the first Panzerfaust, assuming that you can get it to hit the target, can take out practically any tank in the game. If you get a side shot on a Tiger 2H, it's gone. If you get a front shot, you're probably not going to kill it, but that's the only tank that can beat the Panzerfaust 60 from the front. It has 180 mils of penetration, so it does very well for itself. The Panzerfaust 100 is second to none for penetration, and the Offenrohr for Germany performs very well as a more user-friendly AT weapon. As far as their lower tier weapons, the Sturm pistol is surprisingly good. I'm often surprised by how well it performs, but it does have a very long reload time. And the Panzerbuka and the heat projector, they do alright, but the heat projector does better shooting at range than the Sturm pistol does, but it performs very similarly to a Sturm pistol, with like a small heat warhead. As far as the Russians go, the PTRS is actually surprisingly good, being a semi-automatic AT rifle, and this is the same for the Japanese. They have a semi-automatic 20mm AT rifle that is phenomenal. They're usable. The Japanese one is more usable than the Russian one, but they'll get the job done if you need them to. Prefer side shots over frontal shots, though. Moving on, you have your radio squads. So the radio squad has a number of upgrades on it. Chiefly, compared to normal add-on radio operators, they have the ability to reduce the cooldown on their call-ins, but they also have access to more call-ins, so if you want the full radio experience, you need a radio squad. So that's going to give you normal artillery, smoke shells, and it'll give you the ability to call in bombers. Now, the one caveat there is the bombers are very vulnerable now. Anybody with any plane in the game now can fly up and shoot them all down in like 2 passes. So beware of that. It also locks out your team from calling in any other call-ins while the bombers are on their way. So it can honestly be more detrimental to your team than a benefit of your team, situationally. You'll just have to read the situation and decide what's best for you and your team. So, they're a 5-man squad. They can add up to 2 radio operators. They get a choice between an engineer and a machine gunner, and they get a choice between an AT soldier and a medic, in my case. Normally in squads, the medic is changed for an assaulter in other squads. So, just be aware of that. I would always run an engineer, and I prefer machine gunners over snipers, as I mentioned before. And then you can either take the medic or the AT soldier. I think it entirely depends on your preference. I have squads for every nation set up both ways, so it just depends. If you want a more anti-personnel oriented route, you can take the assaulter or medic, and you can take the machine gunner. If you want more AT potential, you can bring the AT soldier. You could, in theory, go full into your anti-infantry potential and take the sniper in place of the engineer, as this squad doesn't actually get any special structures that you can build. That being said, I think having an engineer on every squad is extremely valuable. Mostly because you can build spawn beacons, fortifications, and ammo, but that choice is, as always, up to you. Moving on to our mortar squad. They come with one mortar to begin with. Eventually you'll gain access to a second mortarman. Beyond that, you'll be able to gain 3 specialists. Your first choice will be an engineer, radio operator, and a medic. Your second will be a radio operator, a sniper, and an engineer. And your last choice will be an AT soldier and an assaulter. Now, these may move around for squads that don't have medics as an option. This is just how mine is laid out. So, of course you're going to want to take your second mortarman. You are almost obligated to take an engineer, and you can make an argument for 2 in a mortar squad. And then, if you have to choose between the AT soldier and the assaulter, personally I would go for the AT soldier. Mortars are going to be a much longer range squad, and I don't think you gain much by having the assaulter. But it is an option. Now, why would you want 2 engineers on a squad? Well, there's a number of reasons. For a normal squad, for practicality, you can build faster by having a second engineer, because you can issue an order on whatever you're building, and your other engineer will help you build it, and it'll build faster, or you can even walk away and let him finish it. But specifically on mortar squads, the reason why you want a second engineer is because every time you want to reload your mortars, it will take a full ammo box. If you have 2 engineers, you can build twice as many ammo piles before you completely run out. Because you build the ammo pile, you go and consume it with your mortar soldier, eventually you run out of build points. This is of course predicated on you wanting to strictly play a mortar as a mortar, and in that case, you're going to get your first mortarman, shoot off your 10 mortars, get your second mortarman, shoot off your 10 mortars, build your ammo piles, pick up, shoot, pick up, shoot, pick up, shoot. If you don't want to play that way though, and let's say you just want to play in the action and you just want to lead off with your mortars, you could take your 2 mortarmen, and then you could take the medic, and I would still take an engineer, and then take either the assaulter or the AT soldier. It's up to you. And you could fire your first guy's mortars, your second guy's mortars, and then you could charge the enemy. Both playstyles are viable. They both work. It's entirely up to you. Now, we're going to touch on the machine gunners real quick. I think the machine gunners fall into the same category as assaulters, where if you have them and you're playing at a BR where you have access to a good machine gun, they're kind of an auto take, because they basically do what assaulters do, but they can do it at a slightly longer range. They basically just put lots of damage out very quickly over any area that you can see. Their only caveat is they suck at moving and shooting. They have a dispersion modifier on them, so if they're moving and shooting, their guns become much less accurate. So, in most, but not all machine gun squads, you'll have access to 3 machine gunners, and then you'll have a number of specialist choices. In this case, you'll have medic, engineer, and radio operator, assaulter, engineer, radio operator, and then AT soldier and sniper. The way I have mine set up is with 1 engineer, 1 medic, and 1 AT soldier. You could make an argument with machine gunners to build 2 engineers because they do have a buildable structure, the heavy machine gun, which is excellent. It's one of the best area denial weapons in the game. and you can absolutely mow down hordes of enemies. You can also do some really degenerate shit, building, like, let's say you come across an enemy spawn beacon, and it's not in a building, and it's not in cover, it's like in a bush somewhere, right? You could, in theory, put a bunch of barbed wire around it, build a heavy machine gun, and then shoot anybody who spawns on it. It's absolute peak degeneracy, but I saw it suggested the other day in a Reddit post, and I think it's hilarious. So, that is an option. Most of the machine guns in the game, for most of the nations, are really good. The only exception is some of the BR2 ones are crap, but most all BR3 and up machine guns are very good, and they play up really well if you're not top tier. Now, let's get to the crux of this video. Which squads are worth taking? Now, let's assume that you are a new free-to-play player. You have 4 slots, one of them is being taken up by a vehicle, and at least one of them is being taken up by an assault squad. So you have 2 more slots that you can fill, you have no paratroopers. If you want a close-in squad that has area denial bonuses, and they can do effectively what an assault squad does, but with a different flavor, then the flamethrower squad may be a good option for you. However, because of the recent nerfs to flamethrowers, you are far less mobile than you ever have been with flamethrowers. Now, flamethrowers are heavy, so you're naturally slow, you burn through a lot of stamina running with them, but now, you take a movement penalty while you're shooting them. It makes sense, it just doesn't feel very good if you played with them previously. If you want to have access to all of your fortifications, and you want to go Bob the Builder and deck out your entire objective and make it so no one can come near it, not even your own teammates, then you can go Engineer. They're very beneficial to your team. Just be careful where you're putting your fortifications, and think before you build. Remember to leave a route for your team to get there no matter what. Snipers play really well into the long game. They're excellent when you're defending, and they have niche uses when you're attacking, but their usefulness falls off very heavily when you're attacking. Your AT soldiers are going to be the best ground-based option to counter enemy tanks, short of spawning in your own tank. And depending on your nation in BR, let's say you're an American, spawning in your own tank may not even be an option. Radio operators bring a lot of support, but they're not quite what they used to be. Back in the day, you could call in artillery every minute, which made them extremely potent. Also, when the airstrike first came out, the planes were borderline invulnerable, and the bombing run did a lot more damage and covered a lot more area. So, in the past year and a half, they've lost a lot of their value. And then mortar squads are situational at best. On the one hand, if you spawn in and you're attacking, you can send shells at the enemy, and there's a good chance that you'll hit them on the point. If you're not attacking, they become much more difficult to use because you're basically playing guesswork unless your teammates want to help you out and show you where the enemy are and put marks down, and they don't always do that. They can be very useful, they can be a lot of fun to use, but they don't always perform the way that I would like them to. So, if I was recommending what you bring, I think that there's a very strong argument to be made for an engineer squad. However, if you're going to put an engineer in every other squad that you have, you may not need an engineer squad. They do give you access to some things like anti-tank guns, machine guns, and anti-air guns, which can be very, very useful in countering emerging threats throughout the game. Especially as a free-to-play player, where you only have a tank or a plane on your lineup. I think that they can be one of the most versatile squads that you can add on, because they cover so many different bases. Like I mentioned before, I think the flamethrower is also a very strong competitor because they're essentially an assault squad, but a different flavor of it. As I also mentioned earlier, I think machine gun teams can basically be an auto-include. And then the other two squads that I think compete very well for these slots are your AT soldiers and your radio operators. But I don't think the radio operators have the value that they used to have. So if you put a radio operator in any one of your squads, I don't think you need a radio squad. The use cases for planes are very limited now for the airstrike, and smoke can be extremely useful, but it's kind of rare where you see it used effectively. So I would say that the AT soldiers, depending on your nation, BR, and your lineup, can be extremely useful, but you can also slot them into most of your other squads, so they're kind of... they're like A tier. Your radio squads are also going to fall into A tier just because they give you extra versatility, but they're a specialist that can be added into your normal squads as is, and you can basically fill 90% of their role by doing that. Your machine gunners are going to be S tier, your engineers are going to be S tier, and your flamethrowers are going to be S tier. The machine gunners and the flamethrowers are there because they're very powerful. Your engineers are going to be there because they're very versatile. Your snipers are going to be B tier most of the time, maybe even C tier, because they're kind of a small squad. Let's say B tier, and then the mortars will be C tier. The sniper can be useful, but most of the time, most players that are playing the sniper class are not going to be on the point, and your teammates are going to feel that you're not contributing to the team. If you're very good with a sniper, and you're picking off enemy specialists regularly, and let's say you're spotting targets constantly, you're sniping guys off their AT guns and their AA guns, you're picking off their AT soldiers out of every squad, like, you can be very detrimental to the other team. And they can be very good when you're defending, but it's situational. If you get a team that's pushing really hard, they're going to struggle. But if you get a team that's playing slowly and they're not really attacking the point, playing a sniper is probably going to be the most fun thing in that game. Like, in a game where the other team just does not attack the objective, snipers, vehicles, and machine gunners are probably the way to go. Moving on from there, the mortar squad, I think that they can be a lot of fun. I think if you're playing with a squad mate who regularly spots targets for you, they can be devastating. But I think their use case in most situations is extremely niche. If the objective has a roof, then you're going to have a hard time using them. If your teammates aren't spotting things, you're going to have a hard time using them. If you're defending, you're going to have a hard time using them. So, because of all that, I would stay away from them, even though they can be a lot of fun. Now, if you're somebody who is not a free-to-play player, if you're somebody who has multiple squad slots and you can fill out extra slots, I think there's a much stronger argument then for bringing one of the more niche squads, like the sniper or the radio operator or the mortar, because situationally they can be very good. Now, personally, I would go for duplicates of your assaulters or your machine gunners, maybe even a second vehicle, before I would start putting some of these on. But they can be very fun, and they can be very powerful situationally, so they become much more viable once you add extra slots in. So, let me know down below what kind of squads you like to run, what your setups are. Personally, I like to rush things really hard. I'm a W warrior. sometimes I border on even being a bit brain dead with the way that I play, with my like single-minded determination to just run into the enemy and shoot them. So I can be very aggressive. So I favor assaulters, machine gunners. I used to really like flamethrower squads, but I've kind of moved away from them lately because they get slowed down so much now when they're firing their flamethrowers, but they're still strong. But yeah, let me know what you guys like to run. I know I've been a little bit surprised before by some of the squad setups that people have told me about. I had a lot of fun today actually running all the specialist squads. So I basically set up my Russians and my Germans to have a mortar squad, a radio squad, an AT squad, a sniper squad, a machine gun squad, an engineer squad, a flamethrower squad, and then I kept the paratroopers, the half track, and a plane on. But to be honest, I barely played the planes or the paratroopers or the half track. I was really just trying to play around with the specialists, and it was actually a lot more fun than I thought it might be running like an all specialist squad lineup. Like I don't have a single assault squad on here, and I just have the one machine gun squad. So it's actually been a pretty good time. So it is absolutely viable if, for example, you were a free-to-play player and you wanted to break away from, say, the meta and forgo the assault squad or even the machine gun squad. You could definitely throw on a flamethrower squad, an engineer squad, a mortar squad, and a sniper squad if you really wanted to, or an AT squad, you know, whatever, right? You absolutely can play the game any which way you want to. I had a lot of fun doing it this way, though. So let me know what kind of lineups you guys are running. As per usual, get out there, kick ass, take names, and win your games.
Нужна поддержка артиллерии!
Понял, подтверждаю огонь!
Вызываю огонь артиллерии!